We all saw Damar Hamlin, the Buffalo Bills, fall on the field after tackling a Cincinnati player. In my last video, I hypothesized that it could be, I didn't state for sure, a vaccine-related injury that happened right then. A doctor, who I just saw a video of, said that it might be Commotio Cordis, and I'm going to allow him to explain it, and then I'm going to be right back to you. Maybe you guys will learn something about this very rare happening, and I'll be right back to discuss.
What we saw happen tonight is not related to any sort of vaccines. This is almost certainly something called Commotio Cordis, an extremely rare condition that's one of those things that we typically only think we're going to read about in textbooks. Essentially what can happen is if you have a blunt trauma to the chest that occurs at exactly the right time in the cardiac electrical cycle, your heart can be sent into cardiac arrest. As Hamlin comes in here, we can see this square hit to the front of his chest. We see him get back up momentarily before ultimately collapsing back down to the ground and requiring CPR on the field. This is a tracing of our heart's electrical activity. Basically, this is one cycle of the heart squeezing. Starts off with this P wave, which is the electrical activity of the atrium at the top of the heart squeezing, then the QRS complex, which is going to be the ventricles acting, but then the last phase is this T wave, where the ventricle basically depolarizes and kind of resets to get ready for the next cycle. For Commotio Cordis to happen, you have to suffer this blunt trauma to the chest at exactly the right moment, specifically on this upstroke of the T wave, in order for the heart to then be sent into this arrhythmia and subsequent cardiac arrest. This is one of those things that not only do you have to have a high enough force, but it has to happen within milliseconds of a time window, because if that impact comes at any other time in this electrical cycle, you're fine. You don't go into this. But when it happens at just this right time during this upstroke of the T wave, and if it's high enough, then you can have this thing called Commotio Cordis.
I don't think that it was a 100% frontal impact to Damar. I don't necessarily buy that. It might have been enough to create the Commotio Cordis that the doctor described. I don't know why this hasn't happened on a regular basis in the NFL, considering how many tackles there are every week, why it doesn't happen in college or in high school. It seems like the amount of trauma that it would take would be substantial, but it is possible that in this case, this is what took place. That does not take away from the fact that in our society today, they don't want us to discuss other possibilities, and I mean this in general, that we're all supposed to get behind the state-sponsored narrative. Now, this doctor absolutely might be correct. It very well might be Commotio Cordis and not at all related to vax. I mean, it did happen during the play, and right afterwards, he falls down. It might even be a more likely candidate than a vaccine-related injury, given the fact that there was impact right before Hamlin fell backwards. But that does not mean that the legislature in California, which wants us to go in the opposite direction of what science is, should be discounted by passing Bill AB 2098, which is what leftists want around the country, around the globe. They are using the suppression of speech to stop the discussion of ideas. And the beautiful thing is that when we present ideas, perhaps this doctor's hypothesis is a superior one to those who are calling this a potential vaccine-related injury. And I respect that, but the doctor must be allowed to speak. Others must be allowed to hypothesize, and the best hypothesis wins out by disproving the other. So let's hope and pray that Damar Hamlin recovers fully. It's a very scary incident that took place here. And I hope, for the nation's sake, for everybody who's taken the vaccine, that is not vaccine related. And my point is that we must be able to discuss this, both hypotheses, and allow the best one to win, because free speech is the avenue that we settle our differences peacefully. And by prescribing that we must listen to Pfizer mandates and California, that doctors cannot question the vaccine, the fact that, hey, it doesn't prevent transmission, it doesn't prevent you from getting it, which is what they promised us. This was the real misinformation. And at what point does the narrative settle in the California legislature's mind where we're allowing politicians to tell scientists and doctors what they must be allowed to say? So kudos to this doctor. Hope that Damar Hamlin makes it maybe, and even more likely, it is Commotio Cordis described here. I just want to bring this to your attention, try to be fair, try to present both sides of what might have taken place, and that doesn't change the fact that Gavin Newsom and the California legislature are taking away your First Amendment rights to speak. Because this doctor, if we had decided as the legislature in California that it had to be vaccine-related injury, him bringing evidence up would strip him of his license and cause him great angst and heartache, and that should not be allowed to happen. Everybody must be given a voice. And that's the point, is freedom and free speech that I'm talking about. Peace.